G2 and HooXi have gone from winning Katowice to bombing the major to winning Cologne again, and we need to talk about it. Specifically, I want to talk about HooXi on this team because there's a lot of debate, and I think it's really hard for people to figure out exactly how good HooXi is. I know we had a bit of fun back and forth between Kassad and HooXi. It started with HooXi on stream saying, "Are you watching, Kassad?" Kassad came back with the infamous tweet at this point, and then HooXi got his revenge here at Cologne where, while on the desk with Kassad, he gave him a little side-eye, very cheeky.
Fuck the haters, no?
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, it's just like, people who say I'm shit just doesn't understand the game. And,
oh no, don't do him like that, guys. Come on now.
I love the banter. And by the way, anyone out here who's taking this too seriously, chill the hell out, okay? Even if you don't like either of these guys, the whole fact that you care about this and you're having fun watching is the whole damn point. Let's talk more specifically about HooXi though, because I am very conflicted on what I think about him right now. I think the first thing we obviously have to give HooXi credit for is the general setup and freedom he gives to his players is definitely there. And that makes a lot of sense when you've got a lineup that is so good like the players he has on G2, but it's still something that needs to be done. I think most good in-game leaders would do this, but HooXi's definitely doing a solid job at that. And I will say, at this event, there were a few very cheeky low-buy calls that actually caught teams off guard. There was this one where I loved the double rifles holding top mid, using that to their advantage because they figured this split was coming in, and just a few other stacks in general that went really well for this G2 lineup. And that's oftentimes going to come from the in-game leader, but in this era of Counter-Strike, individual players definitely contribute those ideas as well. I also think it's fair to say HooXi's stats are probably slightly worse than they show him to be as a player, because he literally sends himself first in sometimes with no intention of doing anything except for gathering info for his teammates when he dies. I know that that's something that sometimes people are memeing on him for, but it is very real when you watch it in his gameplay. I'm not sure it's the best way to approach these rounds, but considering HooXi's skills, I guess maybe it is, and it is definitely working out on occasion for the team. There are a lot of points that I think work against HooXi though. For example, when I'm watching G2 play, I just don't see enough rounds where I can look at them and say, hey, HooXi called that round and won it for the team, compared to other in-game leaders like Karrigan, like Snappy, where I see him conditioning the opponents. I see him going for fast plays, then slow plays, and really catching teams off guard. I personally don't feel like I see that enough from HooXi, and maybe that's partly because he's got such good individuals that he'd rather let them work their magic instead. But I still think it's something I'd like to see more if I wanted to call HooXi a truly great in-game leader. And I think another thing that goes against this is that there are some plays from HooXi that I look at and I think to myself, he's actually kind of costing his team rounds on occasion. Like, this apps pop looks really awkward against a dodgy buy, and the main thing that's so awkward about this is there are two players that are so far away from the action that once the first trades go kind of badly, it ends really badly for G2. And I think that's especially a mark when HooXi is going to be running in first and oftentimes just sacrificing himself. He has to have the whole team behind him. And so those two players further back end up in a really tough position because of that. So I think HooXi definitely has some like decent moments in terms of his calling, but I see far too many of these rounds where you have to say that HooXi is to blame. If it's late in the round, he has to be the one to say what the team is doing overall.
Yeah. This is the long way round. It might even be the wrong way round.
Oh, Nico's just passed him.
12 seconds.
See Hawka to struggle. Surely JTS doesn't have the time to clear his corners. D is going to win the round just by virtue of being there and taking down the bomb carrier. G2 a fumble. Nico chasing ghosts. He can't find them.
I think the elephant in the room though is just the tools he has available to him on this lineup. Let me go through this list. First, you have Nico, who has been unbelievably good under basically any IGL, under basically any situation. I think he's maybe the most self-sufficient player in CSGO right now. I mean, you've seen the way this guy not only entries on a lot of maps, Banana, entries on Mirage, oftentimes even pressure lurking like that. But you also see in games on the minimap how he is drawing so much focus, so much attention from other teams. He really is like a black hole sometimes, just creating that gravity, sucking the opponents into looking towards him. And if I'm an in-game leader, that is maybe the best tool available to me. I'm going to use that constantly to try and mess with my opponents. I'm going to put Nico up banana solo sometimes, and then sometimes he's going to have the whole team behind him, and you're not going to know what the hell is going on while he's getting entries and almost never losing map control. That is an unreal first piece to have on a team. Then you have m0NESY, who I think is becoming more and more self-sufficient. He will call for occasional opening moves, but I don't think he has to call for them as much as maybe some other AWPers, because you do have Nico doing a lot of early work. But that's made up for by how ridiculous this guy is in the mid and late round. Just the flicks that m0NESY is able to land makes him such a crazy bailout player to have on your squad. Because even if you've put him in a position where he's not actually expecting an opponent to be there, he will sometimes just flick and land the shot anyway. And again, you can't really say that any of that is down to HooXi's calling. I really think in this era of Counter-Strike, for aggressive riflers, well, for Nico at least, and for AWPers like m0NESY, a lot of their game does come down to what they want to do. And yes, again, HooXi has to get given credit for facilitating that. But the big question is, how many rounds do I look at and I see HooXi winning? And I feel like I'm seeing way more where it's the individuals winning them rounds. Especially because, next up, you've got Hunter. Now, this guy, I think, can be inconsistent. But I really genuinely think he is a much bigger piece to this G2 puzzle than people are realizing. I think he's doing a lot of secondary calling. If you watch the comms videos, he is oftentimes telling people what's going on in the round, where they need to be. He is clearly such a smart and cerebral player in the mid-late round with a lot of lurks, sometimes with early pressure lurks where he gets into a position early in the round and he starts, you can see, almost like pulling the pieces or figuring out how he can get into a good position. And if anything, sometimes I see him getting into like really great positions and maybe like slightly disappointing me by not just completely winning the round from them. Maybe he gets one kill and gets traded and you're a bit like, man, you're in such a good spot, Hunter. I feel like you could have got more. But it shows how smart he is as a player. That's the main thing. Especially in terms of the overall big picture of a round. You can really tell that Hunter knows exactly what's going on, exactly where he expects opponents to be. And so, if your opening moves fail, that is a perfect player to have in the mid to late round to give you an idea of what you need to do. And then to round it out, I mean, JKS, so solid, so underrated. Just put him by himself in a lot of positions. He'll just frag. He'll almost always deliver. He almost never makes mistakes, which is, like, ridiculous. That's exactly what you want from your support player. It's really understated how much this guy has improved this G2 roster. And I think that is a huge point to make, because I know people will try and compare him to prior in-game leaders. People will compare HooXi to Nexa. Okay, well, firstly, Nexa had Amanek and Jax. Okay, that's a pretty big difference from this current G2 lineup. But secondly, we still saw Nico almost solo carry that lineup to event wins, which I think is just proof in the pudding that Nico is the sort of player that is so self-sufficient that I can't really say that HooXi is bringing him to these heights. And then the other one will obviously be to Alexi B, who had Jax instead of JKS for the longest time. And listen, JKS to Jax, I'm sorry, that is a huge, huge upgrade. And we also have to remember, G2 still haven't done shit at the majors, guys. I'm sorry, sadly they haven't. And that is something that they are going to maybe be able to fix in the future. But right now, that is still a bit of a mark on this team. And I think overall, my thoughts almost are, listen, this lineup is so good that if you're just a decent IGL, you'll be competing for trophies. I think if you're a good IGL, you'll be sprinkling in the occasional wins, maybe a little less often than HooXi is, but you'll definitely be doing it. If you're actually a great in-game leader, if you have this lineup of players, you create a goddamn era. You dominate Counter-Strike. And so far, G2 have not been doing that. They're starting to look like maybe they could get there, but I remember at Katowice, it kind of felt the same, where it was more just the vibe and the mood of the team that seemed like it was helping the individuals have their own ideas in a lot of rounds or have a lot of bailout moments. And to be fair to HooXi, I think that is a strength of his. I think he is someone who brings the vibe up, and he seems like a lovely guy, HooXi. Seriously, seems like the loveliest guy going. But look at some of these stats. I mean, their CT round win percentage and 4v5 round win percentage were the best at this event. That is crazy to have already, and let's be real, the in-game leader isn't doing as much on that CT side, and 4v5 is most often just when your players know how to react in a scenario. I mean, Nico had a 1.35 rating as a rifler. How ridiculous is that? How many people out there can do that? Basically none. And as for the competition, listen, the win against Vitality, while it's good, unfortunately, players, for whatever reason, don't care about that final group game as much. And it's really silly, because how often do you see the teams that go straight into the semi-finals progress way further? It's all the time. It's such a huge advantage, having a day off, being able to watch your opponent's games and prepare for it and start to figure out, oh, look, they're doing this on this map. They're doing this on that map. That is something that every team talks about as being so important in modern-day Counter-Strike. But yet, for some reason, the players, and they'll tell you this themselves, they don't have the same intensity when they go into those group games. The win against Astralis was solid. Yeah, I mean, Astralis have had a recent roster move. I think they overperformed to get to this point, so kind of an expected win for me there. And then the win against ENCE was good. I do get the feeling with ENCE, while I think they are still underrated in the community, a lot of them aren't really proven on like the biggest stage, right? I'd say Pius seems like a big game player. I do still think Snappy's calling is incredible. I love the way he almost like has a to and a fro. He like does different things. I think against Vitality, his calling was great. But some of the players, I just think do struggle. Like the riflers, I don't see them having the same go-to guys on the rifle when you get into a final like this. They're not as proven on the big stage. I think you did kind of see that shine through. Like Snappy was one of their better fraggers in the final. That's not normally meant to happen. So it's a good win, yes, in the final, but it's still not really like the top level competition I would want them to beat on the big stage. It's not the teams that are proven in the big stages. And while G2 can only beat who's ahead of them, I think that's fair enough. There is still the question going forward, what happens if Vitality start to trend up slightly and you play them in a final? I think that would be so interesting. If FaZe ever figure themselves out, that is a team that has so many veterans, so much experience. Karrigan is the master of calling towards the end of a game and finding the solution mid-game. That is when I want to see, can HooXi deliver that same thing? Because there are going to be times when he's needed to come up with a switch up, to come up with a strategy that wins his team rounds. And I still don't see that often enough. I see the players more often than not stepping up. And you've got to remember, I was seeing a lot of mistakes throughout this tournament from quite a few teams in the playoffs. And that will happen under the stress, under the big lights. You don't get to hear as easily. It's all getting a bit hectic. The adrenaline's flowing. But still, I think it was more mistakes than I'm used to seeing. And I wonder if teams start to iron those issues out, will G2 still have strong enough players and cooling to come through? I don't know. I think this tournament has proven without a shadow of a doubt the players are no question for me. But the calling, I still don't see it. I still don't see enough rounds where I look at them and I say, HooXi won that round. Or HooXi had to come up with a big call there. I don't think I personally see it, especially when I give a lot of credit to the players on this team for coming up with their own ideas. And I'd also be interested in hearing what you guys think about a HooXi Boomich comparison. Because I think you'd have to say Boomich is a better IGL if you were just judging off results. Like, sure, they also had a great lineup, but we've been through that. I'd say G2's is maybe even better than the old Navi's was. And they won a Grand Slam, they won Cologne, and the Major. I mean, how about that? Like, how can you say anything against Boomich at that point? You've got to say that he was a better IGL than HooXi if you solely go on results. So all in all, for me, while watching the game, I still don't see enough rounds where I look at them and I say, I am pretty certain that HooXi was the one that made the difference in that round, that won them the round with the mid-round call. The round started to go wrong, and HooXi bailed them out. But I'm also aware of the fact that sometimes being a good leader is letting your star players do what they do best. I still think there is a scenario, though, where if HooXi's star players are not coming up with the right reads, or they're trying the same plays that aren't working, there's going to have to be moments where he steps in and proves, I can win rounds with my calls. And I would love for people down below to tell me, if they're HooXi defenders, where do you see these rounds come in? Because I haven't personally seen enough of them. I'll see them occasionally. I still think he's a good in-game leader. That's for damn sure. I think it's fair to say he's a good in-game leader now, Like, I don't think anyone can argue he's not a top 10 IGL right now in the scene, but I still feel like he just has so much talent here. Such a well put together roster. How can I put him higher than that? It's really hard for me to, especially when I didn't feel like they faced too much adversity throughout this run. So overall for me, HooXi, good in-game leader, but probably not a great in-game leader right now. I think the main question here is how much do you give credit to HooXi for kind of allowing his star players to run the team in a sense? And that's tough. I think he does deserve credit for that. Sometimes it can be the hardest thing to do, to step aside and say, hey, NiKo should be making his opening moves. m0NESY should be doing the same. I still can't get over how good m0NESY is in the mid and late round for an AWPer. It's not easy to do that, but his reads are on point. And then Hunter, underrated piece for me in this team. I think his comms are more relied upon than you would think. The space he's taking, the way he's playing between bomb sites, very, very good. So overall, my question is, how much do you guys give credit to HooXi for setting up this team? How much do you think it's the players versus him? And the big question for me is, how much credit do you give HooXi for almost stepping aside and letting the players step up rather than him being the mastermind cooler? I think he does deserve props for that, because there's a lot of in-game leaders that want the game to be played their specific way. They want their specific strats to be the focus. HooXi does deserve credit for stepping aside and saying, actually, I have such great pieces here. I'm going to let them do a lot of the heavy lifting. But I still don't think I see HooXi take the reins enough and say, I'm winning the round with this call. That's what I'm waiting to see before I can call him a great in-game leader. I can't wait to see if he can prove me wrong, though, because I really like him. I think he's a good in-game leader, but he's not the best we have right now. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'll be back with more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.